said, why did I ever let that happen? She said, because you were drunk.
Maude wasn't just groundbreaking. Behind that fearless, liberal crusader stood a woman at war with her own set. What if the real drama never made it on screen? In the next minutes, you're going to uncover the hidden fractures, backstage grudges, and explosive creative clashes that almost tore Maude apart, long before any final episode rolled. Stay with me, because the truth behind the legend just got a lot more shocking. From the very beginning, Bea Arthur wasn't meant to blend in. She was meant to dominate. Long before Maude, she had already carved out a name on Broadway, towering both in stature and in voice. Her sharp wit and commanding presence caught the eye of Norman Lear, the revolutionary producer behind All in the Family. It was Lear who saw in Bea something television hadn't dared put on prime time yet, a woman who could be funny, intelligent, biting, and unapologetically opinionated. That spark led to Maude Findlay's creation, first as a side character on All in the Family, where she instantly stole the spotlight from Archie Bunker. Within just a few appearances, viewers were clamoring for more. But what people didn't see was how hesitant Bea was about committing to television full-time. She considered herself a theater actress, not someone who'd be tied down to weekly sitcom tapings. According to whispers from the time, Arthur worried about creative freedom, about losing herself in a role that might box her in. Norman Lear had to push hard to convince her, and even then, Bea reportedly agreed under one condition. She had to have some influence on the direction of the show. This wasn't going to be just another sitcom, it had to say something. And that was the first seed of tension planted. When you give an actress like Bea Arthur both the lead and a say in the show's politics, you're bound to ruffle feathers among producers, writers, and castmates alike. By 1972, when Maude premiered, the gamble paid off instantly. The show's pilot was a ratings monster. Bea's cutting delivery and fearless energy made her unforgettable. But as Maude soared, insiders say the atmosphere on set grew more complicated. Bea's commitment to making Maude a voice for social change clashed with television's need for entertainment and compromise. And in those early days, when the cast was still finding its rhythm, Arthur's intensity set the tone. You were either with her or in her way. The public never saw those subtle battles unfolding, masked behind laughter and applause. But the people on that soundstage, actors, directors, and crew, knew Bea Arthur wasn't here to play nice. She was here to make a point. And that determination, while it made Maude iconic, also laid the groundwork for the conflicts that would later explode behind closed doors. Because if you thought the only fights were on screen, between Maude and Archie Bunker, wait until you hear what was happening once the cameras shut off. The early 70s was a time when television was still playing it safe. Family comedies were lighthearted, predictable, and carefully polished to avoid offending anyone. But Maude, it detonated like a bomb in living rooms across America. The writers tackled hot-button issues head-on. Women's rights, alcoholism, depression, interracial relationships, even Maude's decision to have an abortion. That episode, aired in 1972, triggered a national uproar. Viewers flooded CBS with calls and letters, some praising the show for its courage, others demanding it be pulled off the air. What the audience never realized was that the controversy didn't just stop with viewers. Behind the curtain, the cast and crew weren't always unified. Bea Arthur thrived on the show's fearless nature. She believed in using comedy as a weapon against ignorance. But not every co-star or writer shared her appetite for constant social warfare. Rumors suggest that some cast members worried about how far the scripts went, especially when sponsors and network executives started to sweat over angry advertisers. Adrienne Barbeau later hinted in interviews that the tension was real. The pressure of delivering both groundbreaking comedy and political firepower weighed heavily on everyone. Producers tried to calm the storm, sometimes urging Norman Lear and the writers to tone things down. Bea? She wasn't having it. Colleagues remembered how forceful she could be in meetings, pushing back on cuts or script changes that softened the message. Arthur wasn't just acting. She was living the part, embodying a woman who refused to be silenced. But when you're the lead and you're that intense, it can spark resentment. Some of her co-stars reportedly felt steamrolled, as though their performances were just second. Adrienne Barbeau was the fresh face of the Maude household, playing Carol, Maude's sharp but often softer-spoken daughter. On screen, she was the perfect counterbalance to B. Arthur's volcanic presence, and audiences adored the dynamic between the two women. Off-screen, though, Adrienne wasn't just another cast member. She was one of the few who got close enough to witness the full weight of B's personality, both the brilliance and the friction it caused. Barbeau was young, still climbing in her career, and she idolized B in many ways. In interviews years later, she admitted that working with Arthur was like attending a masterclass in timing and delivery. But at the same time, Adrienne often found herself caught in the middle of subtle power struggles on set. Rumors from crew members suggest that Barbeau became a kind of emotional anchor, someone castmates confided in when the intensity around B reached its boiling point. B could be warm, even maternal, but when she disagreed with a script note or felt undermined, her sharpness cut deep. Adrienne had to navigate those shifts carefully, learning when to support, when to step back, and when to keep quiet. One incident that insiders whispered about involved a particularly controversial script, dealing with Maude's open support of abortion rights. Some cast members reportedly balked at going through with it, worried about their reputations or families being tied to such a divisive episode. B pushed full speed ahead, and in the middle of this storm, Adrienne Barbeau was said to be one of the few who reassured B, standing by her when others questioned the show's direction. That loyalty, while strengthening their bond, also placed Adrienne in a delicate position with her peers. Was she B's ally, or simply caught in her gravitational pull? Over time, Adrienne became known as the one who absorbed the backstage whispers. If castmates felt overshadowed, or if the crew complained that B's demands slowed production, Adrienne often heard it first. She wasn't a troublemaker, she was a listener. But in Hollywood, even being the listener puts you in the crossfire. It meant she held secrets, frustrations, and grudges that were never meant for the public. Looking back, Barbeau rarely spoke ill of her time on Maude, but her carefully worded reflections raise questions. Did she soften her stories out of respect, or was there far more behind those polite smiles than she ever let on? After all, when you stand closest to the fire, you see the sparks first. And those sparks, once they started, were about to ignite clashes that made even the boldest Maude scripts look tame in comparison. As the seasons rolled on, the Maude set wasn't always the feminist utopia it looked like on screen. Beneath the laughter and applause, subtle rivalries and clashing visions simmered. B. Arthur, with her Broadway training and unshakable gravitas, approached each script like it was Shakespeare. She demanded precision, passion, and respect for the material. But not every co-star had the same mindset. Some, coming from television backgrounds rather than the stage, leaned toward a looser, more improvisational style. That difference in approach created invisible battle lines. Crew members recalled that B's seriousness sometimes slowed production. She wanted rehearsals to be sharp and uninterrupted. If someone missed a cue or fumbled a line, B's glare alone could freeze the room. Castmates like Bill Macy, who played her husband Walter, reportedly felt the weight of her intensity. He leaned more toward comedic rhythm than Arthur's thunderous delivery, and sparks sometimes flew when their styles collided. Rumors suggest there were days when Macy stormed off stage after tense rehearsals, frustrated by what he saw as B's domineering energy. Then there was Rue McClanahan, who joined in the later seasons as Vivian, Maude's scatterbrained best friend. Audiences adored their chemistry, but insiders say that off-camera, Rue's bubbly, easygoing personality sometimes clashed with B's sternness. Rue thrived on lightness, improv, and laughter, while B insisted on discipline. Though they stayed professional, little frictions between their methods made certain rehearsal days feel icy. Ironically, this pairing foreshadowed their future reunion on The Golden Girls and the deeper tensions that would erupt there. Even Adrienne Barbeau, the trusted confidant, wasn't immune to friction. As her career began to take off outside of Maude, whispers spread that B resented any hint of being overshadowed by her younger co-star's rising fame. Barbeau, cautious as always, never fanned those flames, but cast insiders noticed a quiet distance forming between the two women in the later years. What had once been an allyship evolved into a careful balancing act. At the core of these conflicts was a simple truth. B. Arthur was fiercely protective of Maude's message. She wasn't interested in fluff or sitcom gimmicks, but not every actor wanted to carry that burden every week. For some, it was just a job. For B, it was a cause. And when those two philosophies collided, the atmosphere could turn tense in an instant. The longer the show went on, the heavier the weight became. Castmates respected B, but they also feared her. And that fear, mixed with admiration and resentment, was about to shape the fate of the entire series. Because when Rue McClanahan re-entered B's orbit years later on The Golden Girls, those unresolved tensions came roaring back, and the drama made Maude's behind-the-scenes battles look like a warm-up act. Long before The Golden Girls ever existed, the seeds of that legendary clash between B. Arthur and Betty White were already being sown in the shadows of Maude. Most fans assume those battles started fresh in Miami with Blanche, Dorothy, Rose, and Sophia. But in reality, the cracks were visible years earlier. Rue McClanahan, who later played Blanche, first crossed paths with B in the later seasons of Maude. Their dynamic was funny, their chemistry undeniable, but insiders knew it wasn't always smooth sailing. Rue's free-spirited warmth sometimes clashed with B's relentless seriousness. That creative tension, while manageable on Maude, foreshadowed exactly what would explode later when Betty White entered the mix. B. Arthur had a razor-sharp sense of humor, but it was also deeply intellectual and biting. Betty White's style, on the other hand, was bubbly, playful, and sometimes even silly. To B, that kind of humor felt lightweight. To Betty, B's heaviness could feel stifling. And Rue? She was the bridge between them. Adored by both, but stuck in the crossfire. When Rue reminisced about those days, she hinted that the tension between B and her co-stars wasn't a sudden development. It was a pattern, something rooted in B's unyielding standards and her refusal to tolerate what she saw as cheap laughs. Looking back at Maude, you can almost see the prototype of these battles. B commanding the stage, determined to make every line matter, her co-stars struggling to keep pace with that intensity. Adrienne Barbeau knew it, Bill Macy felt it, and Rue McClanahan, who would later be caught between B and Betty, experienced it firsthand. Those creative differences were rehearsals for what was to come. The shocking part? Some insiders have whispered that Norman Lear himself worried about B's long-term compatibility with ensemble casts. She was magnetic, yes, but also a force of nature who demanded the spotlight bend toward her vision. On Maude, that tension was hidden under the weight of the show's cultural significance. But once the subject matter became lighter, as it did in The Golden Girls, those clashes became impossible to hide. And while fans laughed at Dorothy and Rose trading jabs on screen, behind the cameras, the sting was real. B's frustration with Betty White's comedic approach wasn't born in Miami. It was a ghost that had been haunting her career since Maude. But the biggest shock wasn't the arguments. It was the choice B. Arthur made when she decided to walk away from Maude, a decision that blindsided her fans, and one that carried whispers of more conflict than anyone dared admit at the time. By 1978, Maude had cemented itself as one of television's boldest sitcoms, but suddenly, it was over. To audiences, the cancellation felt abrupt. Ratings hadn't collapsed. The cultural impact was undeniable. So why did B. Arthur walk away from the role that had made her a household name? The truth is, the cracks that had been forming behind the scenes had finally split wide open. On paper, the explanation was simple. B. Arthur wanted out. She'd grown tired of the grind, the politics, and the weight of carrying such a demanding show. But insiders whispered that her exit wasn't just about exhaustion, it was about frustration. B had always seen Maude as a vehicle for social change, but by the final seasons, network executives were putting the brakes on controversial storylines. The battles that once defined the series were being watered down. To B, that felt like betrayal. To stay would mean selling out the very principles that made Maude revolutionary. Her co-stars, meanwhile, had their own grievances. Adrienne Barbeau was branching into film roles. Bill Macy longed to move beyond being the eternally flustered Walter, and Rue McClanahan was eyeing other projects. The camaraderie that once glued the cast together had been strained by years of tense rehearsals and Bee's imposing presence. Some even suspected that CBS quietly encouraged Bee's departure, worried that her intensity and the controversies she insisted on tackling had become more liability than asset. Then came the shocking twist. Norman Lear reportedly tried to keep the character alive with a retooled spin-off. Maude would move to Washington, D.C., entering Congress as a politician. Scripts were written, concepts floated, but Bee flatly refused. She wasn't going to let Maude Findlay turn into a watered-down political caricature. Once she said no, the entire idea collapsed. Just like that, 6 seasons of groundbreaking television ended, not with a planned finale, but with Bea Arthur slamming the door. For fans, the loss was devastating, but for the cast, it was almost a relief. The tension, the pressure, the constant push and pull between message and comedy, it had worn everyone down. And Bee's decision to walk away may have been the only way to break free. Still, what happened after Maude is just as revealing. Because the legacy of that show didn't die in 1978, it followed Bea, Rue, and even Adrienne into every project afterward. And when Bea stepped back into the spotlight on The Golden Girls, the ghost of Maude and the feuds it birthed was waiting for her. And in that final chapter, we uncover the secret legacy of Maude. Not what aired on television, but what was buried behind silence, bitterness, and unspoken truths. When the cameras stopped rolling on Maude, the story didn't simply end. What lingered wasn't just a groundbreaking feminist sitcom, but a trail of unanswered questions and buried tensions. Bea Arthur walked away, and with her went the possibility of ever truly exposing what happened behind closed doors. Cast members rarely spoke openly about feuds, but the silence itself is telling. Adrienne Barbeau, when asked years later, carefully praised Bea while sidestepping any mention of real conflict. Rue McClanahan, in her memoirs, described Bea as brilliant but difficult. Those 2 words, brilliant, difficult, say more than pages of praise ever could. The truth is, Maude changed television by saying what no one else dared. But off camera, the cast lived by a different rule: silence. Protect the legacy. Don't expose the fractures. Keep the drama hidden. That's why fans never got the tell-all they craved. The producers, the cast, even Bea herself carried the weight of those years without ever laying it bare. And yet, if you look closely, the signs are everywhere. In the way Bea bristled during press junkets, in the way co-stars hesitated when asked about what it was really like. Some crew members claimed that Bea's intensity drove people away. Others believed it was the price of brilliance. But one thing is undeniable. Maude forced open doors in entertainment that had always been locked. Storylines that shook America, performances that dared to confront taboo subjects, and an unapologetic lead actress who refused to compromise. That tension between progress and pain is the real legacy. And it's that hidden, complicated truth that makes Maude unforgettable. Not just the lines that aired, but the ones whispered in dressing rooms. Not just the episodes we saw, but the silences we'll never fully understand. Because in the end, the feud that tore at the cast of Maude wasn't just about ego or style, it was about the cost of breaking barriers. And sometimes, that cost is too high to ever admit out loud. When Maude ended, Bea Arthur carried both glory and baggage. The role made her a legend, but it also stamped her as difficult, a label that shadowed her into The Golden Girls, where her friction with Betty White played out like an encore of the same battles she had years earlier. Bea's demand for seriousness lifted shows to brilliance, but left bruises on those around her. Adrienne Barbeau, who moved into a film career, spoke cautiously about her time on Maude. She praised Bea, but never revealed much, fueling whispers that the tension was real and simply too messy to put on record. Bill Macy, meanwhile, felt trapped by his role as Walter, working steadily but haunted by the intensity of his on-screen marriage to Maude. Rue McClanahan who reunited with Bea later, put it plainly. Arthur was gifted, but distant. Her honesty confirmed what many suspected. The conflicts on Maude weren't fleeting. They left scars. The show's aftershocks shaped every cast member, proving that its most lasting legacy wasn't just television history, but the hidden fractures it left behind.